Are you available to talk? Yeah, for a short minute, because I got supposed to do. What do you got? I'm low on time.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll just do something quick then.
Yeah, what do you
Something
got?
longer. But um hey, so let's see. What are you I saw you talking about
Oh, actually, you know what? Yeah,
prices.
hold on, I'm not low on time. One sec. Because I can talk to you while I work. That's what I need to do. Hold on. Okay, what do you got? Go.
Second.
Prescription prices.
Okay. No, if you've got the time, we're diving into the alien enemy there. But I already breached the seal on the prescription prices. What do you understand of how the Biden administration is addressing drug prescription prices?
I think they tried to do
Um,
some price controls, didn't they?
so the stuff that I'm familiar with is in either the Build Back Better or the IRA, the actual like base legislative actions during his administration. So he didn't have to do an EO for this.
Mm-hmm.
They made it where now Medicare can,
Set
under
prices
the
on
ACA,
stuff.
can negotiate
Mm-hmm.
prices
That's
with
price setting. I
the drug
mean,
manufacturers.
but yeah.
Well, you're right, but in the sense that what happens there is Medicare acts as the floor, right? So if a employer provides health insurance, it has to be as good or better than the ACA, or else they have to pay the penalty, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you were talking before about kind of, I agree with your take on the like regional pricing bullshit. That's all stupid. But whenever you look at kind of using Medicare in that way of negotiating the prices and then that creating a floor for other insurance, do you view that as like a improper like control on the market for prescription prices, or do you think that that is fine?
No, I'm not necessarily opposed to all price controls. That's probably okay.
Okay. So, and unfortunately, recently, not a lot of people heard about this, but there was a case that came out of, I believe it was out of Texas, where they've enjoined they've functionally enjoined the ACA or the HHS from and the IRS from collecting the mandate from employers. So now employers, if they don't offer health insurance, or if they don't offer health insurance as good as Medicare, they're no longer fined by the government. So a lot of people are saying that this is the first like leg being swept out from under the ACA. So we're seeing kind of a
Oh, this wouldn't be the
rather than a
first. This wouldn't
legis.
even be the first leg. They already did this once. Remember? Or remember when the ACA came out, there was supposed to be a penalty for people with no health insurance, and they weren't able to get rid of the ACA, but they were able to use the Supreme Court to get rid of the penalty, right?
Right, but that's on individuals, which
Yeah,
is part of it, and this is now for employers, which
sure.
this is a very large amount of that. So we're looking at, like you said, that one and this. Now there's a just essentially it is people who are unhealthy funding their own health care, right?
Hmm.
And there's really not a lot that can support it outside of that. So just thought I'd bring those up. I want to see because you were talking more of just kind of like a general discussion around the price controls for prescriptions. I didn't know if you'd seen any of that stuff, and I feel like you've spoken pretty strongly against price controls. So
Yeah,
like,
well,
why do you think
generally
that?
price controls are bad. You just have to understand they have distortionary effects on the market. But the market doesn't solve for everything all the time, so sometimes it's worth it to have some price controls. You just have to be aware of what they're doing. People think that the problem with talking about price controls is people think that pharmaceuticals are expensive because companies are greedy, and if we just price control it to be cheaper, we'll keep every single thing we have the exact same, except it'll just be better for consumers, and that's not the case. There's probably going to be some level of disincentivization for research or investment or something like that. But it's probably worth it to have more people covered by a drug that they can afford or something. I just don't
Sure,
like
and I mean, in
people
this
talking about
case,
price controls are just usually delusional. They think you can do price controls and there's absolutely no negative impact whatsoever.
sure, that's fair. I mean, I think also in this case, since I thought I would get more pushback, I'll still just make the argument of when you're doing it from this kind of insurance perspective, and this is true, I believe, also when you look at some of those international price differences, whenever you see like a single market for health insurance, um, if you're going to go to a pharmaceutical company and say, okay, you have to sell at $50 a pill, but also we are going to buy enough for our entire like country from just you, they're going to be a lot happier to set that lower price early, right? Like in America, if the government came to Nova Nordisk or whatever it's called and said, okay, you're selling Ozempic at $1,300. Well, we're going to buy only from you for everybody under our thing for $400. Nova Nordisk would probably still accept that, right? They would probably be like, okay, like we are making the money we want to make because we know we have this captured market of this amount, right? So
Yeah,
that's kind of
possibly.
one of the
But
reasons why
Americans seemed to be unhappy with that before, when that essentially that offer was made towards pharmaceutical companies with the vaccines, because that's essentially what they did with the vaccines. Is they basically guaranteed that they would buy a fuck ton of them when they were doing the warp speed investment stuff, right? And it seems like a lot of people were ass mad about that.
Oh, I didn't know that a lot of people are asked mad about that. I thought that was like a
Conservatives are ass mad about
like,
everything.
what do you mean?
So.
Oh, okay, conservative people, like stupid people. All right, fair enough. But yeah, that was just one thing on that because I do have some experience interacting with Medicare and stuff like that, and not a lot of people know that it creates kind of that floor for insurance for in a lot of different ways, which is why people should want Medicare to be better and stronger because it makes everybody's insurance better, or at least makes it that everybody's insurance is above a certain minimum.
Sure.
But anyways, okay. I believe, did you read the opinion from AARP versus Trump, that insane Supreme Court decision that came out? Well, actually, the decision was great, but the facts of that case were insane. It was whenever they were trying to deport those people within like 24 hours notice. Did you read that one?
Nope. Well, what about it?
Okay. So remember the original, there's GJJ versus Trump. That was the Boasberg case that went up to the Supreme Court. That group of defendants that are in Texas, they then went for a class action out of the Southern District of Texas, I believe it is, and said, hey, we're going to do our habeas petition here, like the Supreme Court said. Please don't do summary removals under the ADA.
Fuck me. Wait. I fucked up. I'm so
Far
sorry.
away, I can't. Sorry.
My bad.
It's okay.
I did something really bad. Okay, sorry. Go ahead. Repeat that last thing again.
Sure. So they got a class action in Texas. They said, please don't let the Trump administration do a summary removal under the AEA, where they can kind of do an accelerated deportation under the AEA.
Okay.
And really what they're trying to get is just the same thing of where you just can't deport us until this is over. That's really what they're looking for. The district court said, no, I'm not going to give you this TRO right now. And the same day that happened, so April 17th, the Trump administration goes to a lot of those migrants who are being held and says, okay, we're going to deport you tomorrow or maybe the next day. And that's your notice under the AEA that we're required to give you.
Okay.
The migrants file another TRO specifically regarding this notice. And the government on the 18th shows up and goes, whoa, we're not going to deport anybody today. But what they didn't say in court
Testing 1 2
to deport them the next day. The district court was like, all right, didn't issue any kind of TRO or anything. But it was evident that these people were still going to be deported. And so in the next 12 hours, when there was no decision that came down, the migrants then appealed to the Fifth Circuit. The Fifth Circuit took like 40 minutes and were like, we don't give a fuck. And then they went to the Supreme Court right after that. And the Supreme Court provided cert and stopped any deportations. And so then the Supreme Court goes through everything and they find, okay, so like the Trump administration was totally planning on just deporting these people as soon as possible. They provided them essentially anywhere from like 12 to maybe 36 hours notice of removal. And they said, that's not sufficient. You can't do it this way. And they ultimately held, I had it right here. I can't remember, they held that they need to, I know they can't deport under this specific notice that they gave. But they said, yeah, I believe they're saying that they can't remove them under the AEA as long as this is ongoing.
Okay.
Right. So this is kind of a natural progression from the last Supreme Court discussion around the AEA, where they said, hey, you guys have to give people notice. But they didn't say how much notice, right? They just said you have to give them some notice.
Okay.
So then recently there have been two other cases that have come out, one in the Southern District of Texas and one in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And they both have very different rulings. Okay. They have very different.
Okay. Yeah, let's accelerate.
Yeah,
what's ultimately the point of this, or what are we getting towards?
Yeah, we're going towards how the AEA is being decided and why the Supreme Court is going to see it again. And because the Supreme Court never decided, right, whether or not there was a invasion or a predatory incursion, right? They didn't touch that question.
Sure.
And now what's happening is we're seeing issues around notice and saying, what is the notice supposed to be?
Mm-hmm.
And is there a invasion and predatory incursion? Pennsylvania is saying there was an invasion or predatory incursion, but then they laid down specific notice requirements, about 14 to 21 days, depending on the rules. Southern District of Texas says, whoa, no, there was no invasion or predatory incursion, but but then they didn't touch the notice things. They just said outright, this proclamation is deficient and illegal, and it can't be used to deport people into the AEA. And so I was kind of getting to was that the issue is that courts are saying that they can't look at the proclamation and examine it for factual proof, right? They can't look at it and say, are we factually being invaded? Like, are the facts that are being alleged in the proclamation true?
Mm-hmm.
They can only look at the proclamation and say, does that fit an invasion or proclamation? So what's interesting is that so now what's going to happen is we've got these two dueling cases that say it isn't going to go to the Supreme Court and they're going to have to decide. And the issue is that a lot of people are arguing that this is a political question and saying, hey, let's say Donald Trump came out and said that Mexico is invading us, and there's literally no proof of it. There's literally zero proof it's not happening, but he said it in his proclamation. Can a court find that proclamation illegal?
Sure.
And right now, most courts are saying no, they can't do that. They can only look at what he stated because an invasion, determining the facts, is impossible for a court to do without it being a political question.
Gotcha. Yeah. It sounds like, honestly, it actually sounds like a very similar question to the 14th Amendment issue, to where the issue was there was a thing that was laid out that nobody who had engaged in or made an effort or aided people engaged in insurrection or whatever, right, shall run for office or whatever. But there was a conflation of the law and the procedural question where the Supreme Court ultimately shot down Section 3 of the 14th Amendment because they said that there weren't sufficient procedures in the states to actually evaluate the answer to that. They say other things, but that's really what it came down to. And it sounds like for this thing, it sounds like it's kind of similar in that, well, what is an invasion? If there's not actually an official criteria to figure out what an invasion is, theoretically that could be up to a state to figure out, but you could argue that that's a political question, but it's not really. It's actually like a foundational question for invoking the Alien Enemies Act. So yeah.
Well, I think that could be a good comparison, but that's not what's happening. I understand you kind of the analysis you're doing there, but actually all the courts are saying, no, we know what an invasion is. We know what a predatory incursion is because this is a question of statutory interpretation. And they go back and they say, what did it mean back then in 1798? And it's interesting because, TDA was, Tren de Aragua was designated a foreign terrorist organization. And one of the courts, the Pennsylvania court, says, well, that's really similar to, we would probably call the pirates, like the Barbary pirates from 1798, we'd probably call them a foreign terrorist organization. So, and they were definitely considered whenever the AEA was passed. So they can. This group is sufficient as a group.
Well,
do
wait.
the predatory
Were
incursion.
Tren de Aragua, are they considered an FTO?
Yeah, they're an FTO. They were made an FTO a while ago, and they did not appeal it. So it's
That's
fact
really.
that they are an
That's
FTO.
interesting. I would have imagined the answer would be no on that because they're relying on Tren de Aragua being basically part and parcel with the Venezuelan government. But I guess like the IRGC or whatever from Iran is considered a terrorist organization, even though it's not love Iran. But okay.
Yeah, and so what's interesting is they say that you can't. So they can only use the interpretations from like 1798 for these words, but then the application can be so the interpretation can't be judicially reviewed, only the application, right? Technically, the interpretation can be reviewed, but only constitutionally, and constitutionally, it's always past it. So they don't even really consider that anymore. But the application can be reviewed. And so that's where they're coming in and they're saying, okay, maybe, so like in Texas, they're saying, well, no, there is no predatory incursion. There is no invasion under these definitions. And they didn't do the analysis around Tren de Aragua being a foreign terrorist organization. And so that's why you have these dueling opinions. But what's happening now is that we're saying, okay, we have those interpretations. Then courts are kind of twisting themselves to try to find ways to either grant it or not grant it. And so we're kind of on the road to the Supreme Court really laying it out. And the problem that I see here is that no matter what the Supreme Court decision is, unless they totally get rid of the Alien Enemies Act or totally change how it's interpreted, basically all the Supreme Court's going to do is say, here is the checklist of things you need to say when invoking the AEA to make it where it's beyond judicial review, right? Because right now, the courts are saying, oh, the proclamation itself just didn't allege the proper facts to be invoked. But if Trump came out tomorrow and just made a new proclamation with the sufficient facts that these courts are saying, the courts then couldn't say, oh, well, those aren't true. The court doesn't have the ability to do that, right? And so
Sure.
it's really scary looking at this AEA stuff because it doesn't seem like there's any courts are willing to kind of take away the president's just kind of unilateral power to invoke it. And the more that it gets examined, kind of the easier it seems to be for the executive to abuse it.
Sure. I mean,
So
I would argue the AEA is a very powerful act, but I mean, it exists for a really good reason. I think it's pretty inarguable that the president, given the nature of the job and being the commander in chief, should have pretty extreme powers here. I think that the issue is the country is just so unbelievably mind-fucked right now that we are incapable of holding the executive responsible using the current levers, I guess, that we have, right? Because if you and I, let's say that the president were to invoke the AEA in a manner that would just be wholly insane, like he has with Venezuela, right? I'm curious, what do you think would be the most appropriate mechanism by which to hold him accountable for that?
like it's just plainly illegal. Like
Well,
obviously
I
it's
won't say
not right,
illegal
things like
because
that.
it's beyond judicial review, right? We'll say, yeah, he invokes it. He says that yesterday I saw a Mexican come into the country and he said, "Fuck America," and I think we're being invaded by Mexico now. So I'm just letting you know I'm invoking the AA and we start deporting Mexicans. What do you think is the most appropriate tool that we would have to hold the president accountable for that?
Right, impeachment,
Yeah,
obviously.
that's what I would say. Yeah, but we can't do that. We
easily.
literally, this president will never be convicted in the Senate and will never be impeached by this group of sycophantic Republican fucks. So what do you do at that point? When some of your checks start to fail because your systems are so unbelievably compromised by bad actors, I don't know how much the court should rule correctly where the court can rule correctly, but yeah, I don't even,
Sure,
yeah.
I know what you're saying there.
Mhm.
It's easy to kind of feel doomer and like, oh, there's nothing we can do. But I would say that if anything, this is we're seeing in live action or like in real time why the AEA should not exist in the form that it does. I don't disagree with you that these powers maybe should exist in some form, but it shouldn't exist in this form, right? And it should be something that we should want to change, if not now, then in
Yeah,
the
but then the
future.
issue is that you
But
gave
what I
before
would
is if you gave like any list of things to call something an invasion, and the president just says those things have been met, who reviews that?
Well, sure, no, but what I'm saying is that let's say, well, let's say like if I could be the Supreme, if I could write the Supreme Court opinion that that's going to ultimately decide these things, right?
Hmm.
That's going to ultimately tell it. I would say the previous use of the AEA, all of that, fuck that shit. That shit was all wrong. People did not understand the danger that it poses. Here's the new system, and make it. Let's just say I do it in a way where it says you have to have 67% congressional approval to do it. Let's just say that. Let's say I do that, right? And then now Trump doesn't have just an easy flip a switch AEA turned on, right? But he still does everything. He still does
Sure,
these
but at that
horrible
point you
things
might
that
as well
Trump
just,
wanted to do.
because the whole point of the AEA, like in its most perfect form, right? The AEA is, it's Friday night and a Chinese fucking ship has landed, a submarine has surfaced in San Francisco, and a whole bunch of like U.S. Chinese nationals who are like here on visa start helping these people, fighting in San Francisco. And the president needs to say, holy shit, we're at war with China right now. If you're in San Francisco and you're a Chinese national, you're getting arrested. We're like starting like a fight right now, like in its most perfect form. That's what the AEA is for, right? And if you're saying that like, well, we need 67% of Congress to approve, at that point you have no AEA. It's not, you're just like doing acts from Congress. I think the point was to give an executive the vigorous power to fight, when needed, against an invading force. It's just that right
For
now,
sure,
the
but
way that he's using it is just so obviously patently fucking
but
absurd. That,
no, well, 1 second.
yeah.
I agree with what you're saying. Like,
Hmm.
I understand the like, logic you're making right now. But the deal is that at the same time, the judiciary does not have to be blind to the intent and the actions of the people using it.
Hmm.
And there's no reason why the Supreme Court can't turn around and go, okay, right now we've seen that there is an issue going on with the abuse of this, so we are going to, in some way, constrain it in a way that maybe never existed before and maybe wasn't the original intent of it. And if you've got a fucking problem with that, why don't you go to Congress and get them to pass a fucking law to change it?
Hmm.
Because and I understand that it's asking a lot out of this court. I understand. But
Sure.
my point in saying that, why we should do that, is because to me, we should say, oh, if you want to act unhinged, then we're going to remove all the cover that you get for it, right?
Sure.
So
I think
like,
one thing that I think would be nice, they kind of did this with the emergency tariffs thing, although that's too long, is I wish that Congress would amend these bills so that there was like a 14-day or 7-day review. So like the president has the ability to act with vigor when he needs to, but there's like Congress has to just like manually approve it after, 2 weeks or 1 month or whatever, just to make sure there's not crazy shit going on.
Right. And I'll say, I think also, I think that
also,
I think that there's
wait,
there's
real
an
quick, I
argument
just want to see if this other microphone works real fast. Hold on. I'm muting.
Okay.
Okay. Can you hear me right now?
No, play for time. Yeah, go play for time.
Wait, can you hear me?
I can hear you. It's kind of echoey, but yeah.
Good. Okay. I don't give a fuck. Say, get echoed, motherfucker.
All right.
All right. Wait. One more time, speak.
I'm speaking right now.
Oh, bass. Okay. All right. Okay, go. Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. So I think you should keep in mind all the analysis and all the discussion here is around predatory incursions and invasions, right? But for some reason, we never talk about the war aspect of AEA, right? Because war is something that's declared by Congress. And so it seems like within the AEA, we're okay with, some prior event being required by the government to allow the president to invoke the AEA. And then we've got this invasion and predatory incursion that obviously does not have that. But
I feel like that's a really weird thing that I wish people would force conservatives to admit more. Like, hey, you understand that we are at war right now with Venezuela, right? We are at war we must be for the Alien Enemies Act to apply. And nobody ever seems to really talk about that. But I think it's just because it's one of those things that get lost in legalese. Sorry, go ahead.
We don't have to. No, we don't have to be at war with them.
Well, they have to be invading us at least, or we have to be in an active war, right?
And yes, and right now, the Pennsylvania court said yes, an invasion or predatory incursion is happening.
Yeah, so we're at war. Basically, we really are. I mean, like we could, if a country was invading
war is a legal term that we are using here. It is not a layman's term. War here specifically means an act declared by Congress that we are officially legally at war with another nation. This is something that was discussed in Ludecky and some other cases around this where war has a specific meaning, has a specific beginning point, and that beginning point is
well, wait, how did it work there was the authorization for the use of military force in Iraq. Was that considered a declaration of war against Iraq for Bush?
I can't speak specifically to that. I know that executives are allowed to a 90-day period where they're allowed to use military force in a foreign nation without a declaration of war. I believe the authorization if someone in chat can correct me, I'm happy for them to do so. But I believe the authorization was essentially a declaration of war that ratified the executive's use of military force in Iraq. But I'm the opposite of Dave Smith, where I don't know really dick all about the wars in the Middle East, or at least I don't care about them. So sorry, I can't tell you on that. But yeah, war is in the context of the AEA, the war is something that's declared by Congress.
Okay. I mean in that sense, then I don't know how we're still doing this, whatever the fuck we're doing with the AEA then. Because again, it's a predatory incursion. Predatory incursion is a separate thing. How long can somebody be invading you before you're like? Are we just saying there's been a 2-month war against us by Venezuela, but we're not at war against them? They're invading us. Like, I mean, it's goofy. I understand what you're saying legally. It's just kind of goofy, right?
Yeah, I mean, laws from the 18th century are goofy, and that alone.
Well,
to me
no,
is like,
I disagree with that. I don't think it's necessarily the law that's goofy. It's the invocation of the AEA. Like you would imagine, if the president is invoking the AEA because of an incursion, we're probably declaring war pretty soon after, or we fought off the invasion completely, right? That's what you would expect to happen, right?
Right, and that and what you're talking about, though, right? Is this is why I'm saying laws from the 18th century are goofy, is because if this was written nowadays, they would at least hopefully be like, if there's a predatory incursion or invasion, like an invasion, after a month, the Congress has to approve the continued use of the AEA. After a predatory incursion, you have 2 weeks.
Yeah, right? Correct. I would agree with that. Yeah.
Right. Because, in my mind, the fact that war is in there shows that the AEA does have some constraint by Congress's actions, right? That has been at least contemplated by the people that wrote that law. So the idea that we can't then apply that to
but then think real quick about the emergency tariff powers. Those only come when the United States is confronted with national emergencies, But Donald Trump has literally arbitrarily declared national emergencies, right? So it's
Yes.
like,
I have already made my statements about I think that the tariffs are just straight illegal. I do not
Sure.
think that he is legally invoking tariff powers here. He is
Okay.
the way in which that he is using them is outside of how anybody has ever used those powers. And I don't just mean like other people have used tariffs in different ways. I'm saying the acts that he is invoking in the past were not invoked to use to create tariffs. They
Okay.
were not. So like, yeah, I think that he is well outside the bounds of the law on those, and I'm, but and that's why to me, I think that like we should, as much as we can, be saying, yes, he has the power, he's holding the power, but I think that when it comes to people that are very far on the right, people that are fascists and things like that, they crave any kind of cover or plausible deniability to give their fucking sycophantic supporters who can just hide behind that, and then whenever you try to push them at all on that deniability, they immediately turn into baby bird brains who don't know anything about anything but are happy to hide behind it, right? And it's just something where it's like, I just don't like the idea of giving any fucking ground at all in these arguments to people, and I happily fight on those grounds with people.
yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily
that's
disagree.
Well, you were before I explained the war thing. But
I was
good.
for what?
Thank you, I appreciate it. You were saying that we shouldn't put things in place for Congress to limit it.
Well, no, I mean, I thought I
yeah.
said we should have there should be a review period attached to things like the AEA or whatever, where after 7 or 30 days, Congress has to.
Oh yeah, that's fair. I'm sorry.
Although, but then I said it's because Congress is broken. Because unfortunately, right, we both agree that tariffs are bullshit, that national emergency is bullshit. But Congress voted to approve that, and they rescinded their ability voluntarily
Whoa.
What? Go ahead.
They changed the flow of time, Destiny, so that they don't have
Yeah,
to
but
vote
sure,
on
but it's
it.
the same
So
thing, right?
We don't
That's
even
essentially
know.
what they
Yeah,
did, right?
I'm teasing.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, so it's
Yeah,
just
and-
it's frustrating.
It is, but to me, right, what I would prefer here is for us to say, like with the tariffs, I'm happy to say personally that the tariffs are illegal, and then also say, and Congress is abdicating its duty and not voting properly on these things, and I can say Donald Trump is acting illegally, and I can say Congress is bullshit and they're doing stupid shit over there, right? And they shouldn't be doing that. They're abdicating their duty, and that's why they're bad. What
Yeah.
I don't want, and I'm not going to say is, man, these laws are wacky and weird. I guess he can do it. I don't like it, but he can do it, right? I don't want the anger to end up being focused on how weird the AEA is. It needs to be directed at the people who are committing these bad acts, right? And I understand that people all hate Donald Trump.
Yeah, I agree 1,000,000,000% with that. That's the thing that I repeat a lot on my stream, right? That you can't craft a system of laws for people that are just going to constantly do bullshit and play bad faith and whatever, right? Yeah.
Right, and it just needs to be made sure that people aren't like, it's very tiring to hear people go like, oh, the government is so just messed up, and these laws don't work, and our institutions just aren't blah blah. And it's like, no, if I can talk about any of these with you, I'd happy to discuss and explain them. It is not that; it is that you guys are undermining. So that was the stuff on the AEA that I want to go over, and then also I want to talk about the injunctions because. It was interesting because there was a lot of discussion. Did you listen to the oral arguments?
I listened to the government side, but
Yeah.
also because I try to learn some legal stuff, so I can only listen to so much and fill my head with so much fucking nonsense before having to shut it off. Jesus.
The other side isn't like super important to listen to. It's not bad, but it's also from the state's perspective, so it doesn't super track for a lot of things for lay people. But it's a really good one. It was funny because they brought up percolation in there, which is interesting. As a concept of federalism, you understand what percolation is when they're saying that, right?
I'm using context clues. It sounds like percolation is basically allowing a whole bunch of different judges and a whole bunch of different venues to kind of consider a bunch of different facts, and then as you kind of coalesce around a consensus opinion from all of your lower courts and they make their way up to higher courts, then the Supreme Court doesn't just have to rule off one case in a very novel decision. They can kind of see if there's a judicial consensus that's developing around some of these things. The facts kind of percolate, they boil up, you have this mass consensus that starts to form, is what it seems, right?
Yeah, so it's kind of a really good word to describe how federalism works, kind of like how you gave longer explanation, where you have these different areas that can practice and see how different rulings work and different rules work for the same issue. And with the they keep arguing about percolation, where we just discussed the AEA and how it's percolating, right? How these different courts are doing it and how it's ultimately going to lead. And you can kind of, the nice thing about percolation is you can see, okay, this is the thing that the Supreme Court needs to decide, because a lot of times people want the Supreme Court to just decide everything. They want the Supreme Court to come in and say, this law is bad, we've rewritten it. Whereas the percolation allows the Supreme Court to go, okay, we've seen 60 cases. We found this one common issue. By fixing this, it actually fixes everything, blah, blah, blah. It's interesting because the universal injunctions that are being complained about, they are like heavily employed by Republicans as well as Democrats. So it's kind of funny for them to come in and now start complaining about them. But also it just doesn't really make sense. And like, I think that it's pretty easy to understand why universal injunctions exist. And it's funny because like, it's really not even a thing that's a problem except for the government and maybe like really large companies. Because if I take you to court and I sue you because you scammed me, you sold me a bad product and took my money, and I said he sold me this, and I'm suffering ongoing damages because of it, because he's doing something to me, and the court enjoins you from doing it, right? Well, the court doesn't need to turn to you and go, okay, I'm going to enjoin you from selling any products ever again, right? They would just say, you just stop doing this one thing to this one person. But the government interacts with a bunch of different people, a bunch of different parties. So if the government loses one case based on the law, right? If they pay out benefits incorrectly to one person, or they wrongly imprison someone under a law that's not fair, if they lose in court one time, it doesn't make sense for the government to go out and continue the same actions that they just lost in court. They like functional, rational government that actually cares about governing. If they lose a case based off of like a specific law, they're probably going to pause that action, whether an injunction exists or not, to pursue an appeal or pursue, a Supreme Court guidance.
This is true with like
that.
Large corporations or people that interact with lots of other people as well, or something as well, right? Yeah.
Right, and so it's kind of a thing where it's like, it makes sense that universal injunctions weren't really common in the past.
I really don't like that phrase, universal injunctions, but okay.
I don't know. I agree that it's a dumb thing to have or to say, but it separates it out.
It's an injunction. It's enjoining you from performing some particular type of behavior. It's an injunction.
Right, but what's interesting is that people say that like the argument is that they're not legal, but if you look at the rules, the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure 65, it allows the court to enjoin a party and anybody associated with that party or that party controls, right? So if you sue the government, why couldn't the court enjoin the entire government, right? Why couldn't it enjoin people that are connected to it? It just doesn't really make sense in there why that isn't allowed.
Well, and it doesn't make sense for the questions that I think it was Kagan was asking too. Like, let's say that I sue a company because they're polluting in my backyard, and then I win my case against that company. That it's pretty obvious that company should probably be enjoined from performing that behavior, period, to anybody in the future. But under the government's argument, they were saying that if somebody moved and then somebody else moved in, the company could go back to performing that exact same behavior because the new person now that's affected would have to take them to court for an individual judgment. This is a ridiculous argument. It would break.
Right.
It would just be ridiculous. It's patently false. It's patently stupid. The government is only making this argument because they can't defend the merits of any of the underlying actions. So they're just trying to attack or chip away at. Not even chip away. These aren't serious arguments. There's no world where the Supreme goes, oh yeah, injunctions are actually not good. Every single person needs to take every single person to court all the time for individual judgments. Like it's ridiculous.
Well, and I agree with you, but that being said, I mean, do you understand why their arguments around class actions are like totally just also have really no relevance here? Why a class action doesn't solve the problem
Well, for this particular case, it's funny because they are arguing that injunctions shouldn't be allowed, and if you really wanted to do this with a class of people, that you would certify a class. But they also argue for the same case that they would fight on that class cert. So that's funny, number one. But number two, like even if you enjoin or even if you get a judgment against doing something on a particular class, I don't even know how that works going forward. Can people join classes after a suit is over? Or what does it mean like for a state to sue a company or whatever? Is the state itself a thing, or all the underlying people in the state part of that class? Or like it just seems like a clusterfucky stupid way. Like, and then also class certification is a whole thing in and of itself. It's a whole other thing. It's pointless and stupid, I think. But what was your answer?
That's fine. I mean, you're right in the sense that it's adding a lot of extra steps to it, and it's really not what the purpose of those class actions are for, right? Class actions, you're generally trying to find a common like action or event that connects these people to a claim. And as you said, let's say someone's born 3 years later after the end of that lawsuit. Well, are they able to get into that class, right? And
also, the biggest argument that I think came from, it might have been Sotomayor, they use this word, percolation, over and over and over again. Percolation. So for the audience, right, a case only goes to the Supreme Court if a party to the case requests it. You have to request a writ of certiorari and ask the Supreme Court, like, hey, can you please listen to this case? But it was asked to the government over and over again, okay, well, let's say the government makes a law, and let's say that the government's law is police officers are allowed to punch you in the face if you look at them funny. And then let's say that somebody wants to challenge that law. Well, in this version of the government, Republicans or whatever the government's attorney is basically saying, the general solicitor is saying that, like, okay, well, if you were to go to court and win that case, it wouldn't prevent the government from punching everybody. It would just prevent the government from punching that one person who took them to court. And then somebody was saying, I think the government attorney was arguing that it's possible that, like, if this case went all the way up to the Supreme Court, there could be some sort of like precedence that would make it so it would be really hard for the government to win cases in the future. But I think what Sotomayor was rightly pointing out was that case would never, ever, ever, ever get to the Supreme Court, because if the government was like losing cases somewhere, they would never appeal. So any case that the government loses would just die in a lower court. It's like, oh, okay, we lost that one. We'll just keep doing it though. And if we lose cases, we'll just let them die. And it's like, this is what it's just wacky and stupid. It's just such a dumb. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, also add on to that layer that they said that they generally follow precedent, which, like, why even say that in the argument? That's right. Whenever they were going to that line, that was like fucking hilarious. Whenever they were like, well, we generally follow the precedents.
That should have been a shotgun moment in a video game.
Yeah.
That was crazy. They wouldn't commit to following the actions of a court. Yeah, generally we do. We generally do. When we feel like they're correct, we generally do. It was like, what? Are you serious right now? Okay.
Right. Well, yeah. So I think that that was a very good line of discussion, where it was kind of like just hopping around and just kind of never actually taking it to the Supreme Court, because why would you? I think that for me, whenever I look at it though, I will say this. I think that preliminary injunctions as they exist, whenever they're applied in a very broad way like this, right? Whenever they're this national scale, stop this law, we're seeing them being applied more and more. And we're seeing both sides run quickly to a favorable jurisdiction to get one and put them in place. And it makes me, as an attorney, feel like, maybe there need to be further steps taken whenever you're looking at an injunction this big. Maybe a test, maybe something that says, okay, we need to, you can give us you can put down an injunction under the normal test, but if then we're extending it so that it includes jurisdictions outside of the circuit that you're in or things like that, maybe there needs to be a larger test to apply it. Because I think I get a similar feeling as immigration asylum, where it seems like people have found not necessarily a flaw in the system, but they found a part of the system where you can use it in a way that maybe wasn't expressly intended, and it could be causing issues outside of that system. So, I think that people being able to just go to Texas and get an injunction against any liberal law or liberal president's actions, or any liberal going to California or Hawaii and getting an injunction against Republican laws or presidents, I think that maybe there need to be some kind of roadblocks in a way. What do you think about that?
The issue is that, like, a preliminary injunction is supposed to be a TRO is supposed to be exceptional. Preliminary injunction should be relatively exceptional. But I think the issue is that the way that it's supposed to work, and I don't know why every Trump lawyer has just mind-fucked themselves on this, okay? If I was approaching you, okay, as an attorney, or as a client, and I'm asking you, like, I hire you and I'm like, okay, I want to do this particular thing, okay, can you tell me how to do this legally? You're supposed to give me advice on, these are the laws, this is how you could do this to comply with the law. Maybe you can give me a couple tips on kind of pushing the boundaries maybe a little bit, but like you're going to tell me how to do things within the law. This administration is not concerned with doing things within the boundaries of the law. They're concerned with creating new law. And if that's the case, then it's not really surprising to me that all of the courts are pushing back in unprecedented manners against this. When you go to the Office of Legal Counsel, when you go to the DOJ, you're supposed to be asking your counsel, your legal counsel, you're supposed to say, hey, I'm the president. Am I allowed to do this or not? They're not supposed to say, I bet we can take this to the Supreme Court and get this changed. I bet we can fight on this. I think we can do this. I think this is the law. And if you're going to do that, then it's not surprising that a whole bunch of courts everywhere are throwing up a whole bunch of PIs or TROs against you, right? Because like, well, hold on, you don't write the fucking rules, buddy. Like, I don't know if that should be changed. I think that it's probably a correct response to an administration that thinks that they can write laws from the executive, which you're not supposed to be able to do, right?
Well, but look at Biden's administration, right? We had similar things happen with student loan forgiveness. There was another one that I'm blanking on right now. Obama had some in his.
I would argue, and I know Piscomi argued about this, and we disagree, but like I would argue for the student loan forgiveness. I think Biden pushed too far there, but at least he tried to like cite an underlying reason, because I believe that the name of the whatever Student Loan Act or something, it gave the president the ability to do something in like times of crisis or whatever, and there was the COVID crisis, and that was the underlying citation, and then they tried to forgive it, and the Supreme Court threw up a block, and they were like, no, we're not going to do that. Like, at least they tried to do something kind of within the confines of the law. You can say that maybe he was pushing boundaries there, but this administration is doing it around basically fucking everything.
Well, 1 second.
Yeah.
They were enjoined from doing the student loan stuff at the district court level first, right?
Sure.
And that's what I'm saying is that like, and I'm not saying that they shouldn't be allowed to do that, but I think that an injunction that has that much weight in so many other jurisdictions versus an injunction against just one person in a lawsuit, those are both kind of operating under the same test or scheme by the judge, right? They're not having to provide extra argumentation. Now, to be fair, a lot of judges, when they do that, they do provide it. Just sua sponte. They will themselves say, here is why it now needs to be applied nationwide. These are the reasons, blah, blah, blah. But
yeah, I was going to say, I understand what you're saying now. I understand that. But then usually, yeah, I guess it's up to the judge to figure out the latitude there. You could try to write some informal rules for it, I guess, to figure out how they best feel.
No, I think that the Supreme Court should write a formal rule on that. But I think that, I mean, it's just like, it's kind of a thing
hard though when you're dealing with a single entity. Like imagine 50 states have student loan challenges and like 27 states like agree and 23 states disagree. So like some people get student loan debt forgiveness and then some don't. So the federal government has to start doing disparate treatment to different states. Like,
I'm not saying that this would like somehow prevent national injunctions. National injunctions are still allowed. I'm just saying I think that there needs to be further argumentation or further justification beyond just the circuit that court is sitting in, because I think circuits interacting with each other in this way outside of these injunctions is pretty rare, and it's usually
I want to agree with you spiritually, but I feel like in kind of a weird, ironic way, we're playing the part of like the Supreme Court. You know how people don't like it when shitty cases go to the Supreme Court? You want like a really strong case to go to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
I think I would agree with you more if we had like really good examples of judges going way outside the boundaries of what feels like a rightful like preliminary injunction or TRO. But the problem is the government like is openly and like stepping outside of bounds over and over again. The arguments they're putting up, pretextual is a compliment, okay? They're just patently absurd, not even legally coherent arguments. So like the fact that this would not be the environment where I would challenge or question the scope, I guess, of injunctions or preliminary injunctions or after court injunctions. Yeah, there is a world where I would be like, that's kind of weird that a guy in D.C. has this ruling and now it's affecting the entire fucking United States. I think maybe this injunction, maybe we do need to reapproach this or look at how these are issued. But in this environment, I haven't seen the case yet that would make me think like, I think that this is a problem. Yeah.
No, you're definitely right. I mean, like this being the birthright citizenship case, and they're like, oh, let's do the injunctions here. It's like that honestly. The deep state might exist because of how bad of a decision that was to bring that to court. Because holy shit, that was never ever gonna work with that kid. Like, yeah, that was like, I legit like was confused for a second there because I thought there was no way they're actually doing it. I legit thought that it was a different case whenever I was reading through it. Because holy shit, what a fucking stupid decision that was to do with birthright citizenship. You said. 1 second. Whenever you're talking about the different states and kind of like the application being different, right? I think that's and I agree with you real quick on this is not the environment to do it. But I think it's interesting because we've talked a little bit about percolation and federalism and things like that. And I think that's another part where, for me, why I, at least in the back of my head, think at some date this should be revisited. Because on the one hand, we pride ourselves on having 50 states, on federalism, on figuring out the best way to do it, and then taking it to the Supreme Court. But then on the other side, we have kind of a, never mind switch where a judge can just go, you know what, we're just going to do an injunction and we're not going to do federalism with this, right? And I think that's kind of also, to me, where we have a system, and yet for some reason we kind of have this backdoor that lets us just avoid it entirely. And maybe sometimes that's appropriate, right? Whenever they're trying to strip citizenship from people. But other times I could definitely see arguments for it's not. So I think that's just kind of, for me, why, from my perspective, I think there are arguments to be made, but I would never listen to arguments made by someone that's MAGA, right?
Sure.
Did you see that? Did you see that mayor get arrested? I think it was a New Jersey mayor get arrested.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So I believe they've officially dropped the charges now on him. They're not actually going to do it, but they are looking at bringing charges against some of the Congress people that were there. And then the judge that was arrested for assisting the evasion of arrest, she filed her answer to the charging document. Did you see any of that?
Nope.
Okay. I think at this point, I've seen some soy takes on the judge. The mayor, I was really interested because I was hoping to see some more kind of justifications on the Trump side, but they didn't really come out with a lot of them because it was such bullshit. But the mayor one really kind of, it feels like we're seeing a pattern of this administration trying really hard to find reasons to arrest Democrats. Trump recently came out and said that people around Biden were traitors. There have been multiple discussions that have been leaked about finding ways to arrest Democrat Congress people and things like that. Obviously, that shit's all terrible and horrible. Whenever I go back and look at the judge getting arrested, right, and I see kind of how this administration's trying to play fast and loose with the rules, I still think her arrest initially was wrong, but now it seems like it's more and more they're kind of pushing the boundaries, right? And I feel like that's been a theme for a lot of this, where we're seeing with the immigration, now with the arresting of officials, where I think that they're taking any chance they can get to try to push these boundaries, because I don't think that those are the goals. I think that you and I discussed it before, where it feels like the administration is acting kind of erratically for no reason, and they're just doing things cruelly just for the sake of cruelty. But I don't know, it feels like they're building up to where they're getting to a point where they're saying, okay, we're challenging all this stuff so we can see how far we can go. Because I think, like with that judge, if they're able to arrest her and take her down, and she doesn't have the immunity and all that stuff, right? I think they're looking for what's the smallest amount of pretext we need to get away with this. I mean, the more that I've read about the facts of that case, to me at least, the more it seems like I think that this is largely pretextual, and in the sense of I don't think there's any administration that would have ever done this in the past. And so it's maybe, do you understand what I'm saying? Where it's it feels to me.
I guess we'll see. Yeah, we'll see how it turns out or what happens. Yeah. Maybe it's always hard to tell if it's building towards anything or not because of how erratic the admin is, but maybe it is. I don't know.
Well, but I feel like by pushing on immigration, right? They're going after people that Americans don't care about. Americans don't care about immigrants. They certainly don't care about illegal immigrants, right? So playing fast and loose with the laws and the rights there, people don't care. And then it feels like with this judge and some of the Congress people and that mayor, I feel like now they're like, well, what if we go after politicians? Do people care about this stuff? I don't know. To me, I feel like we're approaching this thing where they're kind of trying to see who are the untouchables, who do people actually care about, and they're finding out that people don't really care that much about a lot of this stuff. So yeah, I don't know. I kind of saw. I remember us talking about that, and I heard someone kind of mention something similar, and it made me think about that. Where because at a certain point, if let's say they go to the Supreme Court and they find out, oh, actually, the Supreme Court's cool with us suspending habeas corpus, right? Well, at that point, I don't think they would care about immigrants as much anymore. They would care about just jailing people that voted for Kamala Harris, right? Like it's kind of that thing where, them kind of pushing in these ways, them arresting a state judge and getting away with it might mean that they can now start arresting other state officials, right? Because there's a lot of the executive orders that have been coming out that people haven't been reporting on have been directing the federal government to go into states and find laws that are quote unquote illegal or quote unquote in violation of federal laws, which is fine. States are allowed to have laws that don't conform to federal laws as long as the federal law doesn't supersede it, things like that, right? And so it feels like they're setting up kind of a lattice work of kind of orders that are going to allow them to go in and start attacking state governments they don't like. And I kind of see that coming where we see this mayor, we see this judge, there was another judge that also got arrested. And I feel like I feel like that's kind of what the direction they're going. I don't know. I don't know if you see anything like that, but that was just that. Last thing, I had one more thing for you. Did the Medicare stuff. Is that it? Oh. This was one last thing on the injunctions. There was one recommendation, I think the Democrats tried to get it passed, where they wanted to make it where if you wanted a nationwide injunction, you had to bring it in like the DC court, where they were going to make it where you had to go to a specific circuit to get a nationwide one rather than...
Yeah, any random circuit chair.
Yeah. I mean, in that case, it's you've got issues of like who's sitting on the bench, things like that. And that way people couldn't forum shop. As far as that, would you be open to some kind of more like a procedural limit to kind of getting those kind of nationwide injunctions? Or do you think because a lot of these people want them rapid, they want them fast it
would depend on what the injunction is, but we're super destroying that whole percolation argument at that point. But
yeah. No. Okay. Fair enough. We're cool. All right. Well, let me see. Oh, no, I asked you about the salt tax. We're good. All right. I appreciate you talking to me. Good luck with your rentoid debate coming up. I hope you get some good ones to prove you wrong about how wrong you are about renting.
All right. Should be fun. Have fun. Be careful. I'll talk to you later.
Later.
Bye. Can you hear a huge echo on this mic if I'm walking around? I can't tell if the speaker echoes into it hardcore.